Okay, now for something else. I have this odd sense that everyone in the room knows everything I'm going to say. It's already been said, and something funny happened yesterday. Like everybody else, I've labored mightily over the article, trying to make it be a great article and everything, and make it really good. And then, of course, I got up at 4 a.m. yesterday and left. And the good news is I sent the slides ahead, but I put the wrong essay in my briefcase. So I put in the rough cut. So I've got notes here, but we may wander around a little more. So that actually will maybe lighten it up, so I'm not reading everything too fast, trying to get through it all. So let's see, forward and back. This is something a lot of people in this audience would recognize. It's the ancient character for water. It means the same thing in Chinese and Japanese. Two cultures like the rest of us who have an incredible tradition of art and science and design that has to do with water. One of the interesting things about their art is that it shows great respect and knowledge for the life-giving properties of water, but it also shows how destructive and terrible it can be. And when I thought, what am I going to say that everybody else is going to come to this conference and know everything? I thought, well, I will talk about this banal topic, water, because 21 years ago, for instance, we didn't really talk about water a lot. We were talking about ecology, but now everybody talks about water, and our students talk about water. We're all bored with water. But there it is, we are the blue planet, and one of the interesting things is water is this incredible substance. It is, shall we say, dynamic, right? Something Chris has just been talking about. Hard to measure in many ways, but we have been measuring it. We saw some fabulous diagrams earlier. It gives form. It has shaped the earth in many ways, and we've derived an awful lot of understanding and our sense of appreciation and beauty from it. It's erosive and it's depositional. It doesn't have much of a structure until it gets into this form, and then it has a real structure, and it can gouge its way through mountain ranges and stuff like that. And so, it's very mercurial. It comes as a gas, it comes as a liquid, it comes as a solid. It also has no real, except at the molecular level, it doesn't seem to have much structure. It flops all over the place. We say it runs all over the place, which is an interesting word. So people for thousands of years have been trying to deal with water because we need it to survive. We're animals, and as you know, we are composed largely of water. And most of us live near water in some ways. And when we discovered the idea of agriculture and that you could grow things, it was in an arid region where we needed to organize water. And so we began to organize water around, and because of that, we organized governments so that we could actually get this stuff done. And so there's a long tradition of all that. Now, interestingly enough, that allowed us to live in cities, and the more we lived in cities, the bigger the cities got, the more water we needed, and the more problems we had, and the more use we had of them. And look at this. This is a city today. And, it's like one of hundreds. Many people have a problem not having access to water, and you heard several sort of Jeremiahs yesterday about the dilemmas of water and what it's going to do to us all, and how it's, on one hand, it's going to wipe out cities, and on the other hand, cities will, turn into dust bowls or something. So the notion of too much, too little, the old joke about when you're in the desert, there's two ways to die. One is from drowning and one is from thirst. And it's true. And that's what's going to happen to the cities. And all these people, these favelas, have all this need. Well, the interesting thing is we then also went around and we built most of our cities because, a large proportion of humanity lives near the ocean and lives near a coast. And so we began building our cities at estuaries. And of course, the estuaries were the things that we heard about in another talk that are the things that are recent. They're a recent phenomenon, as we heard. And they are fabulous, and they produce all this biota, and they clean all the water, and they help the ocean, and they help the fish, and they help the life cycle, and they help all of us and all that. And of course, we began expanding our cities into all the wetlands, which are kind of the absolute worst place to be expanding our cities. So what does all that mean to a practitioner? a lot, but you don't quite know what to do with some of that stuff. What you're looking at is this banal project. It's the first project Bob Hanna and I ever did in 1976, so some of you can do the arithmetic. First pond we ever did. It was a result of New Jersey passing a stormwater resolution that was a response to EPA's new regulations, and I overnight had to figure out how to do stormwater calculations, which I did. So we get some drawings into the county, and it was a wonderful project, and it was kind of like Kong Jin Yu's thing of, I wanted to build a hill, so I dug a hole so I could get the dirt, so it was a cut-fill thing, and it gave me biology, and it gave us stormwater. So I learned a little bit about it, and over the next 25 years, so did everybody else. And so now you can fly all over the country, and you look down, and you see this thing, I found this picture of every civil engineer knows how to do this stuff now. And landscape architects are whining that, oh, engineers are doing our work. No, that's not something to whine about. That's great. We've taught everybody else to do this basic thing. Now we can move on to more important stuff, like what we're talking about. So that's good, you know. And some of them are not as nice as you would do, but they're out there working. About, I guess, in the early 90s, I did this project in Germany with Frank Gehry in Frankfurt. Doesn't look like much, but I could not get work like this done in America for the next 15 years, because what you see is porous pavement, you see porous gravel where the cars are parked, you see a swale with vegetation that's natural vegetation that is a hedgerow for wildlife and everything. This was like 20 years ago we were doing this in Germany because we couldn't do it in America. Now every student knows how to do it. So, you know, that's great, okay? So we're getting somewhere, right? It's pieces. I know people were whining about, you know, limited projects and pieces, but you do those pieces and pretty soon other people are doing them and keep at it. So these are the ubiquitous rain basins that you're all bored with, rain basins, and you've heard that. But on the other hand, they're getting pretty good. The one at the bottom is by Bob Marassi in Portland. You know, the other one above is by another Portland firm, some friends of ours. So I'm showing work by other people because, you know, I don't have to show my own work all the time. I'll show you some of our work, but the notion is it's in the DNA, it's in the water now. The field knows how to do this. Here's a project I began, I think, in 1987. It's the old Playa Vista site in Los Angeles. And what you're looking at is about 900 acres of former wetlands that have been filled for Howard Hughes, where he built the Spruce Boost. And what you see is the first drawing I ever did of it down below, and you can see I did a big long drainage ditch down the middle called the park with a canal, and on the left is 45 acres of wetland. That's the first sketch I ever did after I was there, and I said, we should try something like this. And then the city is that kind of stuff that just looks like a little, you know, poche of stuff. The plan that emerged after, you know, a few changes of government, a few other things, and a change of client, and all that, and three different design teams. I still had a wetland of 45 acres in the plan, which, lo and behold, we actually got built. Won a bunch of environmental awards, but in the politics of getting this wetland built, it became such a good thing, people liked it so much, organizations formed, politics formed around it. It's now 200 acres, and it's on both sides, and they did away with a lot of development. So putting that seed out, now some of these projects, you think, oh, it's just a little project. You do the project, and guess what? People catch on. You know, you don't have to do it all yourself. So one of the nice things about what we do is trying to figure out how to get others to do your work as well. This is why I think Bernini was so good. He got all these other people to make his sculpture for him. And architecture. This is a funny doodle that some of you may recognize as the Presidio in San Francisco. I was on an ad hoc team that the Park Service put together to invent the Golden Gate National Park in San Francisco, and there were a lot of people on that team, meeting day after day out there at the Presidio, and one of the things was most of them were doing politics, some of them were doing law, some were doing finance, some of them were doing social programming, some of them were trying to figure out how to deal with the governor or with the feds. In fact, the room was full of feds. But there were three designers in the room. Gio Abada, the O of HOK, Olin, and myself. And we were having a conversation, so we would sit at the side and kind of say, what should happen? And all these other people trying to figure out how to make it happen. We're trying to think, well, what's it? And so I did this little drawing, and you can see up there all those little black squiggles. was, at one point I said, well, I don't care how many historic wars Chrissy's Field was participated in. I think it's got to go. Let's put the marsh back. And so I drew the marsh. And so, guess what? I didn't do the marsh, but George's and Hargrave's San Francisco office managed to execute it. It's the most popular piece of park. I think the people of San Francisco like it more than Golden Gate Park. You go down there, everybody's jogging, everybody's down there, the fish are down there, the birds are down there. The nice thing is you don't have to do it all yourself. You have to put the ideas out there and try and get them going. And as long as, if it's a good idea, it'll have a life of its own. So I'm very proud of this park I didn't do. So now let's go on. Well, you can take authorship, right? Even if it's not yours. Now here's another idea that's been around for a while. It's called green roofs. The picture in the upper right is in Grail, which was a suburb of Fairbanks, and where I was a child. It's a log cabin with a nice sod roof. The orchard, the olive orchard there on the right is near Tivoli. It was a platform for a villa, and here is the structure underneath. You can see the two lower slides. The idea of building architecture that is a platform for landscape architecture has been around since ancient Syria and Mesopotamia. The Romans brought all those great Syrian architects to Rome to build for them because they really knew how to do this stuff. And so when I was in Rome, I thought, this is really great stuff. Architecture and landscape is all the same thing. Look at that. We could do that. You could use architecture as a place to have a landscape. And then I realized my grandfather was born in a sod hut in the North Dakota Territory. He says, green roofs are really an old idea. So when we were doing Bryant Park, it was when they told me they had a problem with expanding the stacks and they didn't know what to do and they were going to have to move out of the library, so just put it under the park. So there's 2 floors of stacks under Bryant Park. It's a green roof. And we've been doing green roofs ever since we started the practice. There's one in our first project, the one at J&J from 1976. So the notion of thinking of architecture as a for other things has always struck me as very simple. This little park that we did a few years ago in Portland, Oregon, and this part of the problem is called a park. I think it's a piazza, but they want to call it a park because that's how the money was built by the park department, so it's a park. Other people were upset that, what do you mean it's a park? Where's the grass? There's no grass. It didn't look like a park, but people there seem to have liked it, and is it ecological? Is this nature in the city? Well, actually, yeah, it's over 5 floors of parking, by the way, so it's a roof as usual for us. We get very few real sites that have ground or earth underneath them. But one of the things is, and there's a little green roof on the little cafe I talked them into, but basically the water from the roof falls down into this big window box that actually moderates the grade between the sloping street and the level terraces. And then all the stuff from the streets is everywhere in Portland. If you work in Portland, by God, you're going to do this stuff. And it's really nice because you have a client who just expects you to do it. They're very hip. So the notion of the water from the streets is caught, scrubbed, run through planters, filtered. The stuff off the roof, so we take care of that. Everything is taken care of. But it doesn't look like the wilderness, okay? You're in town, it's sophisticated, you come from the opera in your suit and you can have a nice drink, but it's got natural processes are being taken care of. I'm going to back up for a minute. So there's a small roof, right? It doesn't seem to be doing too much. You may remember Isaiah Berlin in his wonderful essay, The Hedgehog and the Fox, the idea of some animals have only one big idea, the other one has lots of little ideas. Well, this is the little idea. Here's the big idea. A friend of mine, Bob Kraska from ZGF in Portland, Oregon, was asked by the Mormon Church to do an assembly building for 25,000 people, and they want to be all in one room. And so there's a plan on the upper right that shows the size of the room with a Boeing 747 in it. You can see the size of the city block in downtown Salt Lake. It's 10 acres. Normal city block, right? 10 acres. I couldn't believe it. It fell diagonally. The site sloped 65 feet across the darn thing, from one end to the other. It was right opposite the mother church of this world faith. So So Bob was going to do this big building, and he called me and said, come out, I need some help. So I went out there and I said, what is it you want to do? And he said, well, I got this big building and it's really kind of, I think I need some help, help, what should I do? And I said, well, the one thing you mustn't do, Bob, is think of it like a building. Now to tell an architect, don't think of your biggest commission like a building, if you looked at me, what's wrong with you? And I said, well, he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, if you did a big dome or something over it all, it'll look like the mothership had come to eat all the people or something. I said, don't do that. I said, why don't you think of it like something in the Colorado Plateau, like a great plateau, like a mesa, that, and he said, did you put a park on top? I said, yeah, something like that. So that's what we did. So up on the roof, there is this meadow, this alpine meadow, where we contract grew all these forms, herbs, grasses, and flowers. And then, because it's a black box, because theaters don't have windows in them, so you have this hugest windowless building in town. So I said, well, we'll just treat it like the canyons up Little Cottonwood Creek up here in the mountains, and we'll get the local flora, and we'll plant with native stuff. So that's what we did. This is the room downstairs. 25,000 people, perfect sightlines, no columns. I couldn't believe it. I didn't even understand why clouds didn't form in it. They must have had a wonderful, again, amazing mechanical engineer. But on the roof, it's like that. So that's the roof. So on the one hand, you're looking at the mountains and the Rockies, and on the other hand, you're looking at downtown and you're looking at the church that they've all come to, which is their source of their religion and their fervor and their interest in their faith. And so the notion of nature in the city, a few years ago I took some students here, and we went up on the roof, we're up looking around, and you can take a tour, just go in and sign in and they'll take you up. Well, this person said, Laurie, when you designed this, were you thinking of the rodents? And I went, uh-oh. So I said, oh dear. Because I thought, one of the things is when you do parks in cities, you're always dealing with the problem of rats and all that sort of stuff, and people are talking to you about the wildlife. And I said, do you have a problem with rats? They said, oh, no. We have these meadow mice, and they're really kind of cool, and there's rabbits, and now hawks are coming to hunt, and at night we have owls. And I said, you're kidding. He said, no, it's really, really wonderful. I said, well, I wonder, how did they get there? Well, they always do. They always do. They'll come. So down on the street, one of the things I did also was I said, well, under the street, North Temple, I discovered that there's something called City Creek, and it was in a box. City Creek is why the temple is there. That's why they're there. They went there because in a dry place there was water, but now it's in a box because it used to flood, because every spring when the snow melts, all this water comes down right through town real fast, and they were tired of getting flooded. So we put it in a box, and I said, well, can I have some of it back? And I just like to bring it up and run it down the length of the block, and I put it back in the box. Well, let me have some. So I said, okay. So we now have a regular source of a piece of City Creek running down the street right there to tell people where you are. You know where you are. So I don't know if this is very natural, but it's getting them to think about where they are. Okay? Water. I'm very interested in water, which is part of the theme here. And it has to do with the idea of making it, could you do something with it? Like what could you do with it? So this is a project, a competition I won when I was teaching in Harvard. It's for the company that invented modems out on Route 128. And like all high-tech companies, they have a lot of big mainframe computers that generate a lot of heat and they need a lot of cooling. And so, because they're in a glacial landscape that's heavily glaciated with a lot of high, what do we call it, aquifer, very close, the Flack and Kurtz, mechanical engineers, came up with this idea. They said, well, we could take water out of the aquifer, run it through the building to cool. And I said, great, I could do these ponds, and we could dump the water back in the ponds, and I'll do these gravel beds behind, and we'll and let the water go through the walls, and it'll go back into the water table. So we basically are recycling water out of the groundwater through the pond back into the ground where it came from. And meanwhile, there's enough freeboard for all the stormwater you could ever want in Boston. And also, as they're ornamental, and now we have fish and birds come, and all that stuff happens. So the notion of having the water do something is interesting, but then you get these other kind of goofy ideas. Where working with Frank Gehry in Cambridge, at MIT, we did a framework plan for MIT, and one of the things I learned was, sure enough, MIT, the entire campus is built in an estuary of the Charles River. It's all landfill. Vassar Street, Vassar means water, right? Vassar Street is behind it. And all the water in Cambridge is trying to figure out how to get through to the Charles River, but it can't quite because it has to go through MIT and through the neighborhood. And then there's all the water that falls on MIT. And so I said, why don't we just take the water we've got, and why don't we take this other water, and why don't we just treat the building like a landscape as usual, and it's one of my habits, it's treat it like mountains and hills. And why don't we actually do a big receiving basin, put some stuff on top of it, catch all the water from the buildings and the nearby area, run it through some simple filters, and then recirculate it to use it for the plants, give us a little freeboard for the stormwater, and then the pumps for recirculating, those will just be, we'll do those with the solar panels. We'll run the pumps with solar panels, so the whole thing will be kind of not such a big deal. So there's this big hole, which we filled with this kind of egg crate of little plastic tubes. And then we put the lid back on it, put some sand on it, put all these glacial boulders back on it, planted some trees, and proceeded from there. And so I thought this was really kind of a cool project. I really was pleased, and I thought it was a nice kind of riposte to the usual Ivy League lawns and all that sort of thing. The problem was, of course, that I was criticized because people couldn't see the water. They couldn't see the cycle. So they said, you did this thing and nobody can see it. What kind of project is that? Not very instructive. I didn't know it really had to be instructive. And then MIT thought it looked too messy. So somebody talked about that yesterday. So they put lawn back in there. Well, so this is what it was supposed to look like. It now has this kind of Kentucky bluegrass or something in it because the MIT just couldn't take it. So anyway, here we are. So I thought with engineering, those guys are pretty hip. I thought they'd get this stuff, but they didn't quite, So at Yale, I had this, we were asked to try and fix Science Hill. They wanted to add a couple million square feet of new science buildings to an area that looked like a military base. Everybody hated it, the students hated it, the faculty hated it, it didn't look like Yale. And it didn't work very well. So I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but we immediately figured out the usual things that all NCRAs do. Where's the water? How's it run? What's the topography? Divided into watersheds, and then there's a pointer. And then the first little project was this little quadrant here. So I said, well, we'll take this whole quadrant, all the water from there, we'll deal with it, and my client was Steve Keller. It was on one end, it was Rick Levin, and the president of Yale, and the board, but it also was Steve, who, as has been mentioned earlier, as a great ecologist, and it was for Croon Hall, which is the forestry school of forestry management. Sorry. So I did this. Now, this may offend some of you because it sure doesn't look like a wilderness or a swamp or something like that. But I thought, okay, this time I'm going to reveal the process. There's water. It comes down the hill, it goes somewhere, it goes into a pond, it comes out of these little drains, and I'm going to put water plants in it that have a cultural legacy. People think they're pretty, they're beautiful, but it's kind of nice. Well, what happened to students? This is, by the way, over a huge loading dock and the central receiving basin for that whole quadrant, and all the freight and everything for all the buildings in that part of the campus come there. Because I insisted that we sort out the trucks and the people and all that. So again, it's a deck. And the system for it was fairly simple, but people have been talking about metrics and getting people to buy into your idea. Part of it is Yale loved it. They saved 500,000 gallons of water a year. So that helped them. And then the next job that Karen Timberlake and I did, redoing Stiles and Morris colleges, we did the same thing, only there I did them as fountains that are continually waterfalls by dining terraces for the two colleges, and the kids love it. So the notion of using this stuff somehow culturally, I guess is, so putting water to work and then having it have some visibility, having a cultural connotation or engagement, I think is pretty important. Now, we have spent a lot of time, the thing I didn't say, I'll back up one more. The students liked it so much, they added fish. So that meant now they have to run it all year round. So because of the fish, So I said, no, fish, they could freeze, and they said, no. So the nice thing is, people like these things, and they like to be engaged with them. They want to put their hands in it. Well, I would say that, like many people in the room and many other people around the country. We've spent a fair amount of time in the last 20 years also working on how to help cities get back to their waterfront, the places that help them have a reason to be there. And people are like lemmings. They will go to the water if you let them. And unless you build a fence or a wall, they will get to the water. And they've been walled off from the water for generations. So after we did Battery Park City, you know, some people think it's a little retardé in this plan, but in 1979 when we did it, it was a fairly radical plan. Just build more of New York, but why don't we give people access to a mile-long esplanade on the Hudson, let them step out of the city into the Hudson River corridor and participate in the place. That seemed a good idea, and since you know what's happened, it's kept going all the way up the north, and now it's on the East River. And people, they said, and they're over in Brooklyn. And the point is that get it going, start. Just start somewhere. And then the question is, what should it look like? And of course, there are many different forms depending on where you are and what the problems are. The Hudson River in Battery Park City, even before the current sense of alarm and crisis, which is all quite genuine, before that, we couldn't do water steps because a tugboat goes by with a 9-foot bow wave and the child gets swept away. You know? But at Mission Creek in San Francisco and on San Francisco Bay, we don't have quite the same problem. So when we did the plan for Mission Bay, a big urban redevelopment plan there, one of the things was we again immediately said we'll put all the edge into public land, and then we will do as much of it as soft as we can, and then where we've got housing right adjacent to it, we will do public walkways, etc. So the notion of how to do this is, we know how to do this. Okay, this is state of the art at this point. This is not avant-garde. So everybody in the room should know how to be able to do this with your future career. Okay, and you just have to decide when you do this and when you do something else, how much more stuff. So actually, we did the plan. This was executed by, I believe, SWA. No. EDOC, who I guess don't exist anymore. But, we do, but they don't. Anyway, sorry. Anyway, so more recently, my partners and I have been working on projects like that. All around the country, all across the world, there are industrial waterfronts that people are trying to get back. So Jim's office worked on this in an earlier phase, and I gave studios at Penn two or three times on the Delaware. So our firm recently completed with a huge team of other people, architects, engineers, lawyers, etc., planners. We just completed a 7-mile scheme for the Delaware River waterfront in Philadelphia. It has been approved by the Delaware River Port Authority and by the city of Philadelphia. This is the plan. And so in the next, I would say 25 to 40 years, it will be built out, and different pieces will be sort of like we've drawn, and some will be different, and some will be exactly like we've drawn. But one of the things about this plan that I think you should know is that it isn't just about the liminal edge. It really is about the connections back into the city as much as it is anything else. We were very interested in how to connect all the neighborhoods in the city to the edge. What's the point of the edge if you can't get to it? And some of them are on natural stream corridors that we found, and then when we couldn't find natural corridors, we made them. You have to decide where to put them. So that, because if you believe in equity, and if you believe that the reason you're doing this is to improve society and their lives, then you've got to get the people and have access to it. Because just making a beautiful thing or making an ecological thing is probably not quite enough. So you've seen this. So some of it will look like this, you know, and as in some of Jim's slides, I don't know what the architecture is going to look like. Some of it may be horrible and some of it may be wonderful, but it'll be where it's told to be. That's one of the things. That's one of the things that we know at this point. This is a generic problem also that many people in this room and not in this room are doing around the country, and that is the notion of what was a river in a city that had been dammed and ruined and polluted. And so removing low-head dams all across the country is a project that landscape firms are doing. This happens to be in the Mill River in Stamford, Connecticut. And we worked on this with the Corps of Engineers and some other people up there for quite a few years. My partner, Cindy Sanders, and others have spent a great deal of time. But as of last summer, phase 1 was built, phase 2 was completed, we're now going on to phase 3, and here's the kids. It looks raw, it looks kind of like an adolescent park. You know, the plants are all a little awkward and everything's just a little raw, but it'll grow and it'll get better. But there it is, lo and behold, kids in the water in a stream that they could not only not get to, but was dangerous and was all dammed up and polluted before. So it took a while to clean it up, but these are projects that we're all doing. So you know, the theories you've been hearing about lead to these projects. And the bigger the concept, the more it's going to get done in incremental bits. They get done as physical, limited things. And you're trying to figure out how to have a framework that can accept other hands and can have big pieces, little pieces, people who are a little ham-fisted. You're trying to make sure it'll work. So, with that said, we've heard a lot at this conference, and I think rightly so, about climate change. We've heard a lot about what's going on right now around the world. Well, it's been changing, it's going to change, and you know, I don't think the water's going to come up 6 feet in the next 2 years, but it will come up 6 feet. It's not, you know, and so we have the time to actually do something if we start. The point is start. Because it's going to take us a while to build this stuff, but it's going to take a while before the water comes up too. But we are going to have storms, and we know this is what happens. We know what it looks like, and we don't like it for all kinds of reasons. The other side of the coin, of course, is the West, which is, in the case of California, washing away from floods right now because it's so dried out, the soil is like concrete. Because we have these burns, and of course people, that's a huge burn, I don't know if you can see it. That was the Santa Fe, the burn that almost took out Los Alamos last year. It got within 6 miles of Los Alamos, it took half of a native reservation just to the north of it, huge burns. So these things are pretty serious, and of course, if the cities in the east are expanding into the estuaries, the city in the west is expanding into the forest. And the same kind of dangers are there. So the question of, that's one thing, and then there's what do you do with the old cities that aren't going to go away? They're not like tumbleweeds, they're not going to die and just blow away. The people in the poor cities don't seem to leave the poor cities. We need to help the cities. So there was a competition last year, which was called Soak It Up. Soak It Up was an interesting competition, and in fact, Michael Miller from my office, who worked on it, is here, along with Katie Martin from my office. And one of the things about Soak It Up was it was sponsored by the EPA, federal EPA, and by the Philadelphia Water Department, and it was managed by the Philadelphia Design Collaborative. And the interesting thing about this was they said there's 3 kinds of problems, and they invited teams to submit their quals for it, and then if you were selected, then you could compete. And one of the types of problems was industrial lands, you know, suburban commercial stuff. One of them was suburban development, and one was the urban neighborhoods. And we said, well, we're not really interested in the first 2 because we already know how to solve those. It's out there, the technology is there, the math is there, the technique is there. Everybody knows how to do those. They're easy. And there's lots of slack, lots of looseness in it. But the cities are dense, they're full, there's nowhere to put it, you can't make the numbers work. What are you going to do? So Michael and the guys, Richard Rourke and partner and some others in our office, proceeded to try and figure out how to work with this one neighborhood in South Philly down near the Shot Tower, and what to do. And so one of the things was they said you can't do it with any ones, there is no one single silver bullet. It's got to be a whole bunch of different things. So it's going to be the streets, it's going to be roofs, it's going to be backyards, it's going to be little parklets, it's going to grab the underside of the freeway. You've got to do a whole bunch of different things in combination and put them all together, and maybe it can all add up to enough. And so that's, I mean, so you're working with trenches, you're working with trees, you're working with porous pavements, you're working with redoing streets, you're finding little neighborhood corners, vacant lots. You're just doing everything you can everywhere. You're working with roofs, porches, sidewalks, you know, the whole series of cells. If you do it all, you could end up, and of course we won, it's not surprisingly, because it was a hybrid system with a lot of parts, and the city of Philadelphia and the water department are now starting to proceed to work on parts of that already. So that's a piece of good news. Complicated stuff. This is another project that really kind of goes into the category that we heard of with the request for new WPA projects. The city of Cleveland is on Lake Erie, and it's a huge city, and it's a big old industrial city, and it has some serious problems. Cleveland, like every other major city in America, has a mandate to separate storm from sanitary, and there are standards that are established for each city about how much you can do with ground absorption based upon your geology and your condition and your situation and your climate. And in Philadelphia, we're allowed to get 15% absorption, and the rest all has to be treated. Well, in Cleveland, they give them 2%. Because of their proximity to the lake, because of where the aquifers are, because of the geology, and because of the climate. And so they can only have 2% absorption, therefore 98% of it has to be caught, catched, that doesn't, sorry about the grammar. It has to be caught, and then it has to be taken somewhere, treated, and then allowed to be released as clean water. And for a region this big, it's enormous. And so people have been working on it for a while, you can imagine, not us. And the people in Cleveland have figured out they've got this many different public works projects that have to do with these huge distribution of collection and then bringing it to particular treatment centers. We ended up being asked by an organization to come work with them. This is called Green Over Gray, this project. It's being funded by the Cleveland Foundation, and they are funneling the money through an organization called, what is it called? Land Works, I think. Land Studio rather, excuse me. And they've hired us to do this. We've completed the first phase of sort of a pre-schematic design for the whole thing. And for one of those corridors called Dome Creek, and we've identified all the different places that one has opportunities to do things. And part of what we've identified is that we could, because they thought it was going to be so disruptive, through just ripping through these neighborhoods, they said, okay, and this is the thing I'll argue with my good friend Christina, this is an opportunity, because there was an opportunity to fix some things that were screwed up. So, for instance, in this case, what it meant was, as it goes through Euclid Circle, through this area by Case Western and by the Cleveland Clinic area, rather than just dig up the street, do a big box for the water, and put it back down with the mess that's there, we said, let's move it to the side, let's reorganize the streets, we're going to rebuild the streets, you've got to rebuild everything anyway, and we're going to do this big linear park, we're going to connect it to the Rockefeller Park, and all the way down to the lake, and we will just, you know, the university and the clinic and everything can open out to this new parkway. And so we're going to do that. And so they loved this. And then when we said, well, at the outfall, after it's treated, and there's this outfall where Dome Creek, it used to come out to this big, sprawling spew of a mess out there. It's called Dike 14 or 17, I can't remember. This number, Dike 14. And you can see how big it is. There's a couple here. There's a couple of old lake freighters that are embedded in this thing there for scale, okay? So what we've done is we have used this project as a chance to produce a wildlife refuge and then take some of the effluent, because now we have so much effluent, we could have an absolute guaranteed amount as a perpetual stream to come through here. And so we're going to have a stream being rebuilt, which we know how to do those, and there'll be a wildlife refuge with the riparian and the lake vegetation, native vegetation, and a park and all that sort of stuff. So out of this sewer project, we're getting this for the city of Cleveland. Continuing to raise the scale, we'll talk about something that you've heard of earlier. That, by the way, we think of that as a 25-year project. Our office probably won't be involved in it for 25 years, but you never know. We're involved in Battery Park City off and on from start to finish. There'd be 8 years at a time we weren't working there, and then we'd be go back. And so the notion but you all recognize this, right? Okay, which storm is that? That's Sandy. That's big. You have to kind of look to see where the coast is. And you heard about it earlier from Kate and others, that there's a very interesting project that HUD is doing right now. And as she pointed out, 10 different teams. These projects, not one firm can ever do projects like this. You have to work in collaboration with bunches of other smart people, and you got to get a group that are sympathetic. But for this project, we were one of the 10 teams, just as others were, to be asked to work on it. And like her, we've gone through a couple of phases, and we're hoping we're going to get on to the next phase. We think we are. And so I'm going to show you what we've been doing on that. Everybody knows the classic stuff that Ian presented, that Chris just presented, others have talked, and so everybody knows about the Atlantic shore, but nobody had done anything about it. And it's a social problem, as you've heard. So we were asked to look at this stuff, so we looked at pretty much this whole area, and then picked a few projects, and I'll show them what they've asked us to go ahead on. Like everybody, we started looking at the whole thing, and we did the early analysis, and the early analysis really was mostly about economics, mostly about sociology, mostly about land ownership, because the math about the water and the topography, that's pretty simple, everybody knows it. Well, everybody in this room, let's say, this crowd would know. But when we were doing that, we began to identify specific case studies that we would try and work on. So one of them was at Tom's River, and there were some others. But one of the things we realized was there are these communities that have been there for a while, and that our job wasn't to separate people from the land and their history. Our job was actually to try and help figure out how they could go on being there with recurring storms and things like that, and what might we do. And you know, we weren't going to just put all towns up on stilts like lake dwellers from the Neolithic times. We weren't going to pick them all up and move them inland like we did at Shishmaref and some of the places on the Bering Sea or in the South Pacific. So what do? You know, what does resilience mean to people in the face of repeated storms? And so we began the usual repertoire, right? This is not new stuff. So we went through all the different typologies of ways to deal with the edges, from, you know, the great dikes, and then what that gives you the opportunity for behind. But you don't want to put people back here, because what if it goes over the dike and it fills it full, and then everybody's, you know, up to their ears in water? So this is what happened in New Orleans. Once it goes over, you're worse off than you were before you had it. So we looked at those. We looked at the attenuating things that people have been talking about out in the water in the bays. We looked at all the different things like that, and said, well, there's this whole vocabulary. It depends on where you are, and it depends on what the topography in the town is. And we began to hone in on some stuff closer to the city of New York. And we were looking at Hoboken Terminal and the hospital that, you know, was flooded there and caused a huge crisis. And we began looking at other parts, and we found ourselves wandering around looking at the Bronx, and we began to look at Hunts Point. And when we got to Hunts Point, we realized we were looking at the food distribution system for the city of New York. Basically, the food distribution for 22 million people, or something like that. And so the question, and it could be knocked out. In fact, it almost was. They said, because nothing's ever happened, we'll get away with it. So, I'll back up. Oops, wrong thing. So one of the things is, we said, well, we're going to work on that. And so EPA and the guys there, you know, Henk Ovink from the Netherlands, who's their advisor, and those people have asked us to continue to try and figure out more about Hunts Point. So these are projects landscape architects are doing, as you've heard. So a couple more things. I want to talk about what I think was the premise of this conference for a minute. And that is this idea of nature in the city, and the idea of which aspects of nature do you want and can you stand. What do you mean? Do you mean wilderness, or do you mean something else? We've heard about butterflies, but I'm talking about forest fires and other things. There is a problem, because most people, it's easy to do this stuff and get support for rebuilding natural systems outside the city. This is a wetland I built in Colorado. It's easy to do that stuff, and it's not hard. You find the good people who know how to grow the plants, who know their hydrology, you work with them, you work with the right permitting people. But when you talk about wilderness, and you talk about wildness, what do you really mean? How much do you want? What can we have? You know, we think we've ruined the earth and we're everywhere and we're controlling it. Forget it, you know. We're not. There's a lot of stuff out there still, and nature, the one thing about nature I will say that hasn't been talked about a lot in the way I'm going to talk about it is the stochastic nature. And that is that nature, there are things called accident. I mean, climate's what you expect as a statistical, weather's what you get. You know, and with nature, you get events, and then you get sequences of events, and sometimes you get catastrophic ones, or you get cascades of events, you get invasions of insects. You'll get landslides, you'll get floods, you get all sorts of stuff, and we got stuff like that. There she is. You know. We've been getting a lot of stuff like that. Do we want salmon? We saw salmon yesterday. We could have those. Well, how about wolves? Well, I'm not so sure I want wolves. In Aspen, you know, you can bear-proof every garbage can in Aspen, but are the kids, you know, the parents really think the kids are going to be okay? You know, do they really want bears? No, they shoot them. And so one of the problems with wildlife is, and the wilderness idea, is that when we did, I showed you the beautiful marsh we did in the freshwater marsh by Honey Creek, the habitat that it was favoring were ground nesting birds. There were some foxes. There was a population explosion of foxes once we did that, and the birds were going to be wiped out, so they had to live track all the foxes and take them to the San Gabriel Mountains. So there is this problem that we haven't really talked about when you're talking about nature in the city. I'm not sure what kind of nature you want. You kind of want it without mosquitoes and rattlesnakes. You know, you don't want vectors for disease, right? And so when we look at the cities and what we've been doing and how we've messed things up, and when we think about nature, I think we're talking about the ideas of, shall I say, you like certain aspects of forests, you like certain aspects of streams and marshes and water and meadows, but you're not talking about landslides and avalanches, you're not talking about coyotes, even though you're going to get them. And so there is this thing about bats. How do you feel about bats? They're a very beneficial animal, but a lot of people are terrified of bats. So I just think we need to, if we're going to, you could think of it as the word we heard earlier, a Faustian deal. We don't want to think we know so much that we're like those civil engineers who kind of messed up all the streams and rivers, and like the chemical engineers who thought they could handle all the chemicals. We need to be careful about what we think we have the understanding of and the authority to do, okay? That's enough of that. I will say that in the history of landscape architecture, there are some great things that have been done that have been denigrated by some of my colleagues in the last few years, and even some offhand remarks in this conference. But one of the things about much of the great works of the past is how they have settled into not only the culture, but also have developed an ecological life of a sort that is very rich. This is the Andre Lenotre project at Sceaux, and these are people on the weekend fishing for carp. The notion of nature and art is something that if I had another half an hour, I would go into in more detail, and it's in the article I've written. But the notion of it as an inspiration to us and as a metaphor is something that I think we all know something about. But there is a phrase that Marshall McLuhan used where he talked about one of the great inventions, one of the properties of 20th century art was the idea of juxtaposition without copula. In other words, two things being disassociated, put together without an explanation of their relationship. And interesting enough, this Dicurico is an example of something we value, and then on the right, there we go. Stravinsky in his lectures at Harvard said there's only two choices in composition. One is harmony and the other is contrast. And I think what most people, when they start out thinking they want harmony, what they really want is contrast. I think that's part of what this is about. So there is another topic to take up, which Jim began to take up, and that was the relationship of water to us, to nature, to art. that I think is the next thing. All my life have been attracted to it, and lo and behold, it seems like I look back, I've been doing a lot of drawings and paintings of water for a long time. You know, and it's really part of our legacy, it's part of what attracts us. And so, interestingly enough, a lot of the great works of art that we now think, well, that's that retarded stuff from legacy of regimes that we don't respect anymore, we don't believe in those values. The interesting thing is many of them started out as functional things, then they became ornamental, then they became cultural, then they became art. And they sort of moved from step to step. And so things that started as a place to go get water to take back to your house because you didn't have water became fountains that people wanted to show off their largesse and their generosity and how big and important, and hire better and better designers to make the fountains. The same with the ponds and the agricultural estates that became pastoral things, that became these beautiful compositions that then, sure enough, the fish and the birds and the eels and all the other animals move back in. And so the work of art becomes a work of nature as well, and the work of nature becomes art. And I would like you to think about that a little bit. It's one thing to say that on an estate, it's okay if you have water and fountains and you can kind of play. That's a lavish thing, the rich people can play. It's not really necessary, but I would say in the city it is necessary. These things, I think, are vital to us. The aspects, the properties of nature, the color, the texture, the movement, the sound of this enlivens our cities. And then my litmus test for design is kids. Does it work for children? They're kind of my canary in the mine. If you want to know, have you produced an environment that is a healthy environment or environment you'd like to be in, would a kid like to be there? And I think that's another test. Rich people can go to the mountains, they can have vacations, they can go to the vineyard, they can do all that stuff, they can have a fountain in their backyard. But most people don't anymore. Most people don't get away. Even people who have money don't get away very much anymore. They're busy, they're working, they're tied down. And so the notion of bringing the attributes of nature into the city in one way or another, no matter how artificial you think the device is, the attributes of nature are important to us as animals. And you heard about that from Tim Healy yesterday. The notion that these colors and textures, this movement, is important to us physiologically as animals. You've read The Last Child in the Wilderness, you know about nature deficiency, you've heard all that stuff. It's true. We need it. We need the change of focal length. And so, the last thing I'm going to show you, and I'll just dash through it, is there's another part of the world that we haven't faced, I haven't faced, and that's this part of the world, suburbia. The sprawl all over America. It's actually, when you ask, you say, how many people are now urban? When they say urban, they don't just mean Center City, Philadelphia, or Manhattan, or Brooklyn Heights. They actually mean a lot of this stuff they call urban. Silicon Valley is urban from one end to the other, but it doesn't feel very city-like. It's not very dense. But in this environment, we were recently asked to work on a private corporate project, which I can't, because of a non-disclosure agreement, talk to you about. However, Silicon Valley is kind of like the Vatican or the court of Louis XIV. Everything's private and everybody knows everything. So you can look this up on the Cupertino website because of and I'm telling you, because of the EPA, because of the environmental impact statement, you have to file all your drawings. And so all our pre-schematic drawings and some of our schematic drawings are all there with their title block, but I can't tell you about this project. But you could go to a hearing and say why you object or why you support it. So it's really just, when people told you we have weird regulations, they weren't kidding. So in the middle of this big corporate project, which uses a lot of native, it's basically one of those, yes, it's arid, so it's all native plants, thousands of them, contract growing, everything. In the very middle of it, there is this pond I proposed. It's this very simple thing. It's 180 feet across. It's a simple circle, simple form. It's just in a grove of trees with some gravel around and chairs, and that's all. So this is a usual Photoshop thing. It's actually, you can't see it, because like real landscapes, you can't see it in one image, which pleases me. So we talked the client into building a mock-up of about a fifth of it to test the hydraulics, because the idea There's a very simple idea, and that is that it's going to be from the center, waves will come out to the edge all the way around, and just little gentle waves will keep coming, that's all. That's all it is. It has a rock bottom, there's trees around the edge, and the water moves. That's it. I think it's going to be really nice. And I think they think it's going to be really nice. They really believe in it. What happened was when I was explaining it with the drawings, one of the executives from the company that is paying our bills to do this thing got so excited, he said, Laurie, that's like, and then he got out his iPhone and he showed me some photos of the shore at Lake Tahoe where he goes for summer, where he's gone since he was a kid. He said, it's like this. And I said, yes. It's just like but the point is, imagine, so we're just building a thing that is like where you went when you were a child. And you can go sit there with your latte and get calmed down, after you just had this difficult meeting in the office. Well, you may think this is pleasure for private. There's 15,000 people that work here. That's as big as my hometown in Fairbanks, Alaska. So doing something for 15,000 people, I don't think it's too private anymore. I think that's like you're doing something for a lot of people's lives. And when I look at it, I think, yeah. So at one point, there was this question about, does it really need this thing that makes the waves do this? And I figured out how to do that. With CMS, the guys who did all our fountains, did all Larry's fountains. So one of the things I said was, well, yeah, no, we need it. He said, well, but won't the breeze just do it? And then I said, well, it will, but I'm worried because, the trees, it might be a kind of wind shadow, it might be too still. And I really think I want to make sure that I know they're going to have these gentle, because the thing about the waves is they're always different and they're always the same. And they're always moving and the sun. He said, well, can you turn it off? I just like to see it. It's just, how it acts with just the breeze. Because you can see there's no breeze in the trees. So we turn it off. And it went, just like dead. And I said, see, it just goes dead. He said, no, I got it. Okay, so we're going to have just this little thing. That's all. So I'm going to end with that and say that the reason I'm showing you that is this thing Jim was kind of getting at. It's this thing about, and this is the B word we don't use all the time, beauty, but it's about life itself. And it's about why we care about nature is because we're part of nature. Cities are in nature. We are nature. We're not separate. We're in nature all the time, all day, every day. You're in nature right now. We've got a lot of stuff around us. It's like clothes and extra layers, but the laws of thermodynamics are operating in here just like they are outside. Everything is the same in here as it is outside. It's just tempered and different. And so when we talk about nature and cities, we all mean it. We want it because we're it. We want our cities to be life-supporting and beautiful and rich. Okay, thank you very much.